Welcome to Foodytime. I'm Jay Fettigan, and in this episode, I've selected some of my favorite clips from Foodytime so far, starting with celebrated poet and author Charles Coe. Charles is one of the best storytellers I've ever heard, and in this episode, he tells a funny story about a White Castle in Manhattan and a poignant story about the neurologist and author Oliver Sacks. Enjoy. Charles, thank you so much for being on Foodytime. Could we start maybe just tell me a little bit about yourself? A little background would be helpful.
Sure. I was uh, I was born in the Russian forest, and I was raised by wild albino wolves. I graduated the Sorbonne at 12 with a double major in Byzantine poetry and mobile home management.
Well, that just about covers it, I think.
That's about covered it. Well, years ago, I retired from my full-time job about 9 years ago at the
Mhm.
Massachusetts Cultural Council. And as part of my job before Zoom and virtual meetings, I would go to other parts of the country to sit on review panels, grant review panels.
Mhm.
And when I went down to New York, I had this routine. I would take the train to Madison Square Garden, and
Mhm.
this hotel was a 50-minute walk away. But on the way to the hotel, there was a White Castle on 7th Avenue. And I would stop in the White Castle and I would get four cheeseburgers and have a Diet Coke. And that's what I would do.
Yeah.
It would remind me of my childhood. Oliver Sacks, uh, a few months before he died, had an essay in the New Yorker called Gefilte Fish.
Mhm.
And it was about how when he was at the end of his life, uh, there were very, very few things that he could eat, but
Mhm.
that he had this housekeeper, this cook, an African American woman
Mhm.
who learned how to make gefilte fish, and she called it filter fish. And he loved it when he was a kid. He loved gefilte fish when he was a kid,
Mhm.
and the gefilte fish she made was the best that he or any of his friends had ever tasted. So
Mm.
there was this demand that she make it for her for their for their gatherings and so forth. And he speculated about how when he was a child, gefilte fish was one of the first solid foods that he ate
Oh,
when
wow.
he was a little kid. And it was one of the foods that was ushering him out of this mortal life.
Mm. Wow. The next clip is of one of my dearest friends who also happens to be the founder of the Boston Wine School, Jonathan Alsop. John is an educator, a tour guide, an author, and he tells a really interesting story about the lessons that he learned while teaching wine classes in China. So it seems to me that the furthest your wine travels have taken you, of course, would be China.
China, Australia, New Zealand.
Yeah, so Australia, New Zealand is one tact, and then China. What wine is like in experience through the eyes of a completely different culture.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, so I mentioned before the first wine class I taught, I've learned 100 times more than I taught. I
Right.
felt I felt the same way when I was in China. First of all, here are people in class who speak English, but English is not their first language. So I'm having to think about how to say things that are meaningful in a way that people will be able to take it in.
I imagine you have to stay away from idioms and idiomatic speaking.
Idiomatic expressions, the the horse getting out of the barn, like that doesn't mean, that doesn't, not only does that not mean anything, it just puts a distance between where you are and where you're going. One of the first things that I learned is that traditionally, stereotypically, and truly, a lot of Chinese drinking culture is very fast drinking, heavy drinking, bottoms up shots.
Kind of
style.
like college students, sort of a thing.
Very, very much,
Mm.
very much.
Hmm.
And what we're doing in class is we're saying, hey, slow down, look at the wine, smell the wine, let's talk about the wine, taste the wine, let's taste it a second time, what happens. We're all about extending the experience over the dimension of time, so that you can get more out of it. And when I would say that, my Chinese audiences would literally say to me, hey, have you met us? We don't do that. Okay, so no. and it was tough. It was tough. It took me a long time until I think probably my second or third teaching tour that I did there. I actually met a winemaker who was a rice winemaker, and he took me to. And this is an entire separate story of how this tea class blew my mind.
Right, I bet.
Changed my whole tea life completely. But one of the things that happened in this tea class was a long tradition of there's the color of the first cup that we comprehend, and then comes the color of the second cup, and we talk about how the tea has changed. Right? It's the same tea, it's the same water, but the first cup is going to be much lighter. Maybe it's going to be fruitier flavors. The second cup is going to be darker. It's going to be maybe more earthy, more leafy than the first cup. And when we talk about how the tea has changed, we talk about ourselves. We talk about what it was like to taste the first cup versus what it was like to taste the second cup. And how did I feel about it? How did that make me feel?
Wow.
Going from this to ultimately a place of psychological perfection, where you're digging the whole totality of the aroma, the color, the temperature, the texture. Tea has texture too.
And how did this influence you in teaching the wine classes?
So the next day when I taught the class, instead of talking about slowing down, and I realized that what I was saying to people essentially was, look, you're doing this wrong. You're doing this wrong. You're doing this too fast. You're doing it wrong, people. This is like, this is what I was feeling. I realized that's what I was communicating. So the next day at the beginning of class, I said, I had such an interesting experience yesterday. It's good for me to take classes too, right? I took a tea class, and guess what I learned? I learned that there's this long, and then here's what I learned. This long tradition of really appreciating the dimension, the time between the first cup and the second cup, the color, the aroma, the flavor, and the time that we give to tea in order to achieve this, again, this psychological perfection, which doesn't always happen, but that's what you're shooting for every time. And I said, so now we do this with tea. We know how to do this with tea. We already do it. Been doing it for thousands of years. We're not going to do anything you've never done before. We're going to taste wine now the way we taste tea. We're going to do something different with wine. We're not going to shoot it this time. We're going to approach it. And you can do this. You already know how. And just seeing people going from with basically the same information, but getting them oriented and people don't like it when you tell them they're doing it wrong.
Oh, you think?
and it just took so much pressure off because they said to themselves, "Oh, I don't normally do this with wine, but I can do this because I do this all the time. Not a
Well,
problem."
you related
Let's do it.
to a common experience because you had an experience that they understood.
Exactly.
One of the things that I think is that I've always been impressed with in terms of your approach is how accessible and not snobby your view is about wine and wine teaching. Could you talk a little bit about your philosophy?
We get people come in the wine class and they start smelling wine. The other day, a woman actually said that it was the first time in her life that she had ever smelled anything on purpose. So I've never lost my memory of what it was like to learn that for the first time. Not to be too pompous and unbearable about it, but wine is art too. And when you see a piece of art, when you experience a piece of art, sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it happens a lot or very little. You should not be exactly the same person as you were before you saw it. Great art changes you, and in a kind of a smaller way and much less important way. That's what happens in wine class. That's what happens when people taste wine. That's what happens when people put it together with food. They're just never exactly the same again, and that's why we're here.
Oh. Very, very dramatic
Yeah.
punctuation there. John, this has been great. I love talking with you as always.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
Melissa Vaughn is the curator of the cookbook section at the Bryn Mawr bookstore in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Needless to say, she knows everything cookbooks. She's got a great sense of humor, and in this episode, she shares her cookbooks and makes recommendations. Enjoy. There are a lot of cookbooks, celebrity cookbooks, that look to me like they're nothing more than a vanity project.
Yes, I agree.
And there have been some great celebrities, like Vincent Price, for example, was an excellent cook, wrote great cookbooks.
We got one of his cookbooks in the store, and I was delighted and fascinated. And you can tell who's got an understanding of food and who doesn't.
Right.
So yeah, I think you're right.
And then I look at like Gwyneth Paltrow and I've looked at her cookbooks.
Yeah. See, I have a saying: you never trust the skinny people with food. So.
Seems that people that have cookbooks have a lot of cookbooks.
Well, and it's funny. I actually can show you mine if you want to see them. Sure. I do have a lot. So we are in my pantry. I've got 2 levels of cookbooks here, and they really span everything. I think it's good to have. I like Julia Child's cookbooks. I think they're easy to follow. I think she wrote for the home chef. I do think some of her original ones suffer from a different food source than we have now. You don't have your butcher, and you certainly don't have the cuts of meat and somebody taking care over your cuts of meat like you did back then. But she's good with basics in talking about how to do things. So any real basic Julia Child cookbook is great. This one is from Julia Child's Kitchen. Of course, there's Mastering the Art of French Cooking. The Way to Cook is a great one. If you want to talk Italian, I love Marcella Hazan. You just can't go wrong. I've got all of her cookbooks. This is one of my favorites, Marcella's Italian Kitchen. It's just fantastic. It's just good, simple Italian cuisine with very fresh ingredients.
Looks well loved.
Yeah, it is. If you want to make pasta from scratch, Giuliano Bugiali, he's very, very precise. If you want to talk science, Cookwise by Shirley Corrier, or the Cooks Illustrated people have also put out a good compendium on food science, which is really good.
What do you mean people that don't understand, what do you mean by food science?
Food science, do you know why an egg turns white when you cook it? Do you know why you do certain things a certain way? Why certain cooking techniques have to be precise? Um, how you keep, I don't know, things from getting bitter, for example, when you're cooking them. Food science book, fantastic. Let's see. Oh, Carol Field, baking. If you want to make any kind of Italian sort of baked goods, Carol Field, fantastic. I love Carol Field's books.
Right.
If you want to be very precise, if you wanted to make your own wedding cake, let's say, or something extremely precise, Rose Levy Berenbaum, can't go wrong. Cake Bible. She also has a pie Bible too, I think. I don't have that one though. That's probably good for now. I mean, I have lots and lots of cookbooks. They're all different specialties and things. I could go on and on.
No, this is great. Yeah, often I think that this is exactly what people are looking for, is somebody who's knowledgeable, who can more or less hold their hand and show them.
Oh, yeah. And when people come into the store, I do that. I ask them what they're looking for. Sometimes they're looking for something specific and we just don't happen to have a copy. A lot of people come in and they want it. Yotam Ottolenghi cookbook, great Israeli chef, sort of newish age cooking, which is really good. But they sell like hotcakes. Same with Joanne Chang's flour. She has a bunch of bakeries in Boston, and people love Joanne Chang's works. So,
well, terrific. This has been great.
Well, thank you.
It's very entertaining and informative at the same time. So I really appreciate you doing this. Thanks a lot.
Of course. Oh, thank you. Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you too. Next is Jacqueline Church. She's a vocal advocate for Boston's Chinatown. She gives culinary and cultural tours. She founded Fan Chinatown, the charitable organization, and she gives us an insider's view of her favorite restaurants and places to go in Chinatown. Enjoy.
One of the first things that always brings people to Chinatown is the food. Right.
Yes.
Their Chinese friend took them to a banquet and they said, wow, this is fantastic. And they go back to the same place their Chinese friend took them to, and they're maybe too timid to go into any other place in Chinatown. And so
or dim sum. I mean, I know so many people that, go into Chinatown for dim sum and then bring in friends or other people who, who would normally, do something different.
I was tickled to have several tours in the last couple of days. I'm glad that I still have a voice for you, because it was the end of the Lunar New Year holiday, which is a 2-week holiday.
Yes.
And so we have all kinds of fun and crazy food traditions and other types of traditions. But I had back-to-back tours on Saturday and then the Lion Dance Parade tour on Sunday. And so I was really tickled on I think it was the Lion Dance Parade. We end up the tours with dim sum or a meal. And that was the Lion Dance Parade, because there was a family with some teenagers, and one of the teenagers was eager to try chicken feet, which I know is quite unusual for most people. And they're delicious and I love them, but I don't often get them because people are a little skittish about trying them. But I'm always encouraging people. I'd love for you to try whatever you want to try. You don't have to like it. You don't have to eat it, but I can show you how to eat it and I can tell you what's really good here. And so she was really eager to try it and she wound up really liking it. And that whole basket of chicken feet got shared around the table. And, the first bite's a little unusual for most people, but once you taste it, you kind of click in and you forget about what you're eating. It's just delicious. So that kind of stuff really, really excites me. And Chinese grocery stores are very unusual for most people, because we have the huge live fish tanks. We've got a butcher section. We've got a huge produce section with vegetables most people don't see anywhere else. So it's really fun to take people and explore with them. And especially if I have someone on the tour who likes to cook, because I'm eager to show them every single thing they need to buy to make their stir fries sing, to make their chicken more tender, to buy this, to do that, It was really great. This Lunar New Year Lion Dance Parade, which is the finale of the 2-week holiday.
Mhm.
The past couple years with COVID, with snow, with rain, we had the parade, but people were cold and shivering, and there weren't that many people coming out. But this was really phenomenal. It was packed. I would say there was easily 1,000 people in Chinatown. It was just amazing. So it was great to see my favorite Wuching White Crane Kung Fu studio. They trained the little kids. And
Mhm.
I got to tell you, the last
Yeah.
dance I saw before I left, I was looking for them all day because I had a red envelope to give them. And I wanted to say hi. And I caught them just by accident going up to Taiwan Cafe, which is another great restaurant.
Mhm.
And I caught them. But at the very end, there was a little baby lion who was just learning the moves, learning the dance, right?
Yeah.
As well as Adriana and the big lion. But there was a little boy who was coaching the little lion. And he was showing him him or her, I don't know, how to
Mhm.
grab an orange and toss it. And so the baby lion grabbed the orange and kind of tossed it. But the little boy who was coaching gave them applause and said, "Good job, good job." And it just said everything to me about these kinds of organizations that are training the kids not only in a traditional martial art and a traditional dance form,
Yeah.
but also in how to encourage each other and lift each other up.
Mhm.
To me, that one, I'm going to get teary now. But that one little moment, it just tells you so much about the character and about the people and about the community. So just love it.
Oh, well, that's fabulous. To wrap things up, here's Charles Coe reading his poem, This Tomato.
This tomato. Tonight's dinner is a single tomato, a massive heirloom, ruby red, local, perfectly ripe, sliced thick, sprinkled with salt. I never bother with tomatoes in the off season. Those billiard balls shipped cross country, picked green and gassed to turn them red. When the good tomatoes are gone, my tongue's attention turns elsewhere. When I was young and waved goodbye to friends who packed their lives into cars and headed down the road, I always assumed I'd see them again someday. Some I never did, never will. I hope I'm here to greet next year's crop. But now I take nothing for granted. Tonight's tomato, this tomato, is an exercise in the ephemeral, a juicy, vine-ripened reminder of time's blinking eye.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Foodytime. I know I had a great time interviewing all of these interesting people. I hope you'll tune in next time when the person I'm interviewing is going to be in Croatia, and she's going to talk about Croatian wines and food and travel. We'll see you next time on Foodytime.